Chapter 6. In the Cave. Beowulf fell on his back, and immediately the monster was on top of him, stabbing him with the sharp knife. She was looking for his heart, and she stabbed again and again. But Beowulf's chainmail resisted, and the monster's screams of frustration grew higher and louder. Beowulf was twisting his head from side to side. He suddenly saw, among the precious things flickering in the firelight, an enormous sword, bigger than any sword he had ever seen. He pushed and kicked the creature on top of him and rolled over and over until he was kneeling by the sword. He lifted it and swung it through the air, just as Grendel's mother was coming at him again with her knife held high. The sword cut her head from her body, as easily as a knife cutting through bread. All the fires suddenly grew more intense, and the cave was filled with light. Beowulf looked around and saw piles of treasure and the body of Grendel. "Revenge, Beowulf, revenge," a voice in his head said. Once again the sword swung through the air, and once again it cut a head from a body. But when Grendel's head was cut off, the blade of the sword melted, as quickly as snow melting in the hot sun. The Danes and Geats had been waiting by the side of the lake for hours and hours. No one had spoken for a long time, and hope was fading. Then there was a wind in the trees, and the water turned a deep red. It had been bubbling, but now it was boiling. It was a terrible sight, but everyone stared at it, even though no one wanted to. Gradually, the boiling died down, but the water stayed deep red. Hrothgar closed his eyes.
"Poor Beowulf,"
he said to himself.
"Let us return to Herod Hall,"
he said sadly to the warriors around the lake.
"King Hrothgar,"
said one of the Geats,
"we will wait here until there is no more hope, even if we have to wait days." "Very well. I will send you food and everything you need,"
said Hrothgar, and he and his Danes slowly rode away. Beowulf stood in the cave, staring at the huge sword hilt in his hand. There was nothing left of the blade, nothing at all.
"Poison,"
he thought.
"Grendel's blood must be poisonous."
Beowulf looked around at the piles of treasure shining bright in the light of the fires. What should he take? What would bring him most fame? What gifts should he take to Hrothgar to repay all his generosity? Without thinking further, Beowulf strapped the sword hilt to his body with his belt and picked up the massive head of Grendel. He also picked up Hrunting to give back to Unferth. He began swimming back to the surface. There were no snakes or monstrous creatures to attack him now. At the moment of the death of Grendel's mother, they had all disappeared.
"Beowulf!"
shouted the Geats when his body broke through the surface of the water, and they rushed to help him to the shore.
"And Hrothgar?"
panted Beowulf.
"Where is he?"
"He went back to Herod Hall,"
said the Geats.
"The water was boiling. It was the colour of blood."
"Grendel's blood, when I cut his head off,"
said Beowulf.
"Now let's go."
Herod Hall was in mourning. Hrothgar and Queen Waltheow were there with the most noble Danes, but the only feeling they all had was grief. But everyone raised their heads and looked when a loud voice that they all recognized shouted from the doorway,
"King Hrothgar!"
Beowulf marched in with his warriors, 4 of whom were dragging by the hair the enormous head of the creature that had haunted the hall for 12 years, the head of Grendel.